technical assistance during your call, press *0.
There are 15
parties in conference, including you.
And you prefer not to have your voice on the recording or anything like that, of course you can always use the chat. You can always use the chat function, and you can let me know if you'd like to remain anonymous.
Okay, so I'll just jump in from there, Rachel. And you all heard my name, but I want you to know that I've served a number of roles on this project over the years, and as an analyst, as a visualization specialist. I have background in remote sensing and GIS, as well as in ecological analyses, watershed studies. But right now, I'm primarily interested in the ecosystem of people. So you are a really important group of people who are on the front lines of working with communities, and you're really the target audience we had in mind when we built the Climate Resilience Toolkit and published it a little over a year ago. This is the third anniversary coming up of the President's Climate Action Plan, and we're part of an intergovernmental effort to help communities around the country deal with climate adaptation. Climate Resilience Toolkit specifically is a website and resources designed to help you and decision makers improve resilience in communities at various scales around the country. So what do we mean by resilience? It really means it's a term that comes from systems theory. So if you have a system and it's perturbed, it's changed, something happens from outside, the system is either going to move to a new state with new functions, or it can recover the functions that it had. Resilience describes the capacity of a system to come back and withstand and come back from a disturbance. So in real practical terms, a storm comes, floods your streets, the water goes away, your streets are still there, people didn't get harmed, you have a resilient system. But if the flood comes and knocks out your power grid and it takes a year to rebuild, that's a sign of a brittle system, and we want to improve the resilience of that system. So getting into the specifics of what this means in different places and different times is really one of the central challenges that you have, because we're all in a very new and emerging field. I was reminded of this just 2 days ago in the New York Times. There was a major story that came out that I'm showing on screen here from the coast of Louisiana, which for many people, Louisiana has been called a ground zero of climate change, because this is where a whole confluence of factors come together. You've got rising seas, of course. You've got the focal point of a lot of tropical storm systems. The land is also sinking because the Mississippi River has been diverted, and the sediment from the Mississippi no longer replenishes the coastal islands and wetlands. So the New York Times on May 3rd just reported about the resettlement of about 60 residents on Ile de Jean Charles in Louisiana, using about a $48 million grant of federal funds, primarily targeted at tribal nations, people who have lived here in this place for generations and generations. It's a confluence also of land use, where erosion has been really exacerbated by land use decisions and logging and oil efforts, as reported in the New York Times. So this is really one of the fastest changing areas of land in the world. It's an area the size of Delaware, has already disappeared from southern Louisiana in just the last 80 years. So for people in the Biloxi, Chitimacha, Choctaw Nation, it's really, in many ways, a very poignant loss of a lifestyle to consider moving off of this island. From another point of view, though, it's important to take action and even retreat from land if you're going to ultimately prevent loss of life. And so one perspective here by Walter Kalin is to essentially plan ahead. Before the disaster strikes, make sure that you give people the opportunity to respond before disaster strikes. So let me ask you guys to maybe unmute your phones and let us know, what do you think? Is the retreat from Ile-de-Jean-Charles an example of building resilience, or is it an example of a broken system? Anyone can feel free to chime in. We'll call on someone. Perhaps.
Hi.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Hi, I'm Kate. I'm one of the Vistas actually in New Orleans, and so I'm very familiar. Yeah. And I think I would say that it's an example of building resilience, but it's kind of a hard question to answer since this resettlement plan is really the first of its kind. And so I think they are building resilience, but it's in a completely new frontier. And so I think it's kind of yet to be seen if it does end up building resilience, but I think the goal is definitely to make it so that this community can exist in the future as a community rather than having no plan and then everyone gets scattered. And so I do think the goal of it is to build resilience, but whether or not that goal is achieved is yet to be seen, since nothing like this has ever has been done before.
Thanks, Kate. Great answer. And what I want to really highlight about what you said is that you also did us all the favor of defining what you mean by this system, and it's really the community, retaining the sense of community, the connections among people. And that's really the point I wanted to make here, is that the way you define your focal asset of concern really determines a lot about how you will ultimately measure the capacity for resilience, your capacity to make a difference. And so for this exact same place, we could look at this from a number of perspectives. If you looked at it from preserving the community on the island, you might say, well, this is a system that's breaking. Or, as you said, I think correctly also, it could be building resilience for the community, just moving them. If your perspective is coastal Louisiana and you're the governor of Louisiana, you might think this is a positive step towards preventing a disaster involving loss of life. If you're looking at it from the perspective of the United States as a whole, as we look at coastal Louisiana, we're really confronted with a lot of complex questions dealing with our energy supply, our domestic energy supply, our continued extraction of resources from the Gulf of Mexico, for example, our supply chains. And then in a global sense, this is embedded in a story that has a much larger arc. But for each of these, the threats are also different. At a small scale, it's really looking at Ile-de-Jean-Charles, it's really about land reduction. At a coastal Louisiana scale, we're talking about and considering that the threat to that asset is storm surge over a very large area. For the nation as a whole, we're considering sort of the national impact of storms and flooding. Big events really do reverberate throughout our economy. You pointed out, Kate, the relocation and keeping the sense of community, keeping people together, whereas I think in contrast, the flooding in New Orleans led to a diaspora of people that really has not resolved in terms of our national, the identity of those people with one another and where they fit in our nation culturally. And then at a global level, there's the global sea level issue. So these threats and assets really differ by scale. And so if you're dealing with climate information and you're thinking about the global sea level rise issue, you may be concerned about coastal inundation worldwide and the potential for tens to hundreds of millions of people to be displaced by rising seas. And by one United Nations an International Organization for Migration study, it's by 2050, we really are talking about a massive relocation of people mostly involved in farming and fishing. And so that's important on a global level. At a regional level, we've known for over a decade, of course, that there's major threats to the whole Gulf Coast and the East Coast of the United States, particularly centered on Florida and Louisiana, of sea level rise. And I think some of you are probably grappling with some of these issues at that scale, or you may be looking at a local scale, the impact of losing land. And this is a map showing in brown all the land that's literally already been lost just in the last 60 or 70 years, or 80 years, excuse me, on the coast of Louisiana due to our land use and climate change. The green areas, interestingly, are areas that have been filled in, and it's new land, which there aren't many of those, but those are associated with economic activities where we're actually subsidizing land building up. So the scale of your problem really matters. And the way we address the complexity of this through the Climate Resilience Toolkit is by grounding every example in a case study. So case studies is really a core idea of sharing the information that we have to offer. It tells you about the way people are identifying stresses and impacts to assets that they value, and then the action that they're taking so that you can learn by example and then find and use the resources that they use in another location to apply to your situation. So we're going to dive into this just a little bit more, this case study concept, by just considering in Louisiana. Here's some tide gauge data from NOAA showing that looking at over a 100-year period, about a 3-foot sea level rise scenario. If you project this out forward into to the end of the century for this area, so that's obviously going to have a huge impact. And Kate could probably tell us more about that if she wanted to. But if I wanted to find out more about what communities are doing in Louisiana, I'd probably go into the toolkit, into the, we call it taking action section. It's really a case studies library. And then I would filter, I would use these filters to look for case studies that were relevant to me. So in this case, I've just pulled out all the filters and I've clicked the boxes and I've just superimposed them on the screen to really emphasize for you what these filters do. But we could choose sea level rise and storm surge and coastal flooding stories where those are the threats, and these all deal with the topic of coastal flood risk. I want all the examples where people have gone all the way to making a decision and implementing something, and I want to look in the southeast. And once I do that, from the about 100 different case studies, I've narrowed this down to one that you'll see on your Vista virtual campus a little later on, but also this one about the same region where on Grand Isle they're actually taking some action, and we'll jump into this one because this seems to match our study area. And for this, I want to point out that in accompanying the story, we have a tool that you can use to explore the hazard, and it's called Climate Explorer. I'm going to jump out and show you what Climate Explorer does. It puts these data in context. So here we are on Grand Isle in Louisiana, and this red line is already drawn on. This is an interactive map that can show you not just the local impacts that we're concerned with, but all of the areas throughout the nation where coastal vulnerability to sea level rise is acute, and that's these red lines. The orange is also very high risk of coastal inundation and storm surge impacts, And then as we move along the Gulf Coast here, we can see some areas of moderate risk and so forth. So what this allows you to do is say, well, if they took certain actions in that region, maybe I could apply them to an area on the coast of Georgia, say. And so you might be interested, if you lived in this region, in applying those lessons learned. And what this tool allows you to do is just drape on these layers of information in a way that is logical and allows you to transpose the lessons learned. So this Climate Explorer is one of the tools that we'd like you to become familiar with over time. So I just want to point out that when you go to a story, you'll see a link to the Climate Explorer. I would encourage you to jump in and see how we've separated out the risks and the stressors here on the upper right from the impacts, the assets, the people, the infrastructure that could be influenced by the impact of sea level rise. So let's say so here obviously we're looking at vulnerable coastal areas. What would be the influence of a 3-foot sea level rise on those areas? We can drape those data right on and superimpose them, and you can see the potential influence of this climate stressor. You can see this whole region of intracoastal waterway would be inundated with 3 feet of sea level rise on the coast of Georgia. And likewise, we can zoom out and evaluate impacts in a larger context. So that's just one example. We've got lots of different stressors and impacts embedded within this tool that we've built as an application to sort of allow you to explore threats and impacts from climate. So we're really focusing, coming back to Louisiana, I want to emphasize that our team has really been going out and documenting the impacts of climate variability and change on communities around the country. And we've gone and documented them through video, through writing stories, developing visuals that can really help you talk with your decision makers in your local communities. You can download and use these resources to help explain complex ideas to your colleagues. And we're hoping that you'll come and take advantage of these in your own work. I'm going to return to this particular asset toward the end of the call, but I wanted you to know that we've got this capacity for developing original visuals and film, and these are, usable. You can share them through social media, use them in your own presentations, and so forth. So I have to figure out how to go on. Okay. So at this point, I think Rachel wants to take you through your own search and use of the Climate Resilience Toolkit.
Yeah, thanks, Ned. So we want to take a couple minutes for you to just get some hands-on experience in checking out this resource. So what I'm going to have you do is go to the Climate Resilience Toolkit. And we've purposely not put up any, URLs or anything to make it easy for you. We want, this to be sort of like a hands-on learning and figuring out. So it is toolkit.climate.gov, but from there, what you'll want to do, I'll give everyone a chance to navigate there, toolkit.climate.gov. And once you're there, you'll see the Taking Action section, or the Case Study section that Ned just talked about across the top. And what you'll want to do is select your region of interest, and then identify how many case studies there are on the toolkit that are from that region. So everyone take a minute to do that, and if you are having any trouble, feel free to unmute your phone and let us know. Okay. So let's just see what you came up with. Anyone want to just unmute and let us know what, where you're from, what region, and how many case studies you found? Anybody? All right, anyone on the phone from Phoenix? Anyone on the phone from Anchorage? Anyone on the phone from Norfolk?
Hi, this is Alex from Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Hi,
Hey.
I actually have more of a question.
Yeah, go for it.
So we're in Pittsburgh, and it's kind of at this weird, kind of intersection between the Midwest and the Northeast.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just kind of curious which region you think that would fall under for the sake of your case studies.
Good question. Hello, and my son's in college in Pittsburgh. I've really been enjoying getting to know the city.
You go to Pitt?
He goes to CMU.
Okay, I just graduated from Pitt.
Congratulations.
December. Thank you.
So we put that in the Northeast, not because it's, I think there are a lot of geographical reasons why you might want to put it with the Midwest, but we use the U.S. Global Change Research Program's definition of regions, and that's an interagency group focused on assessing impacts in the United States of climate change. But the way regions are defined is you'll find is quite variable around the federal government. And in the future, I think what you're going to find is an ability to search for content more just based on the map. But for now, that filtering system puts you in the Northeast. Okay.
Yeah, because it seems like the Midwest has more relevant risks and climate threats to Pittsburgh's current situation.
Yeah, and geologically and hydrologically, it's draining to the Mississippi, and I agree.
All right, thanks. That was my question about that.
Well, so Rachel, maybe we should just cut to the chase, and I mean, we're hoping that all of you were able to navigate into the Taking Action section. Please say right now out loud if you were not, but we have, for the southwestern United States, we have 25 different case studies. The southeast, we have 20. In the northeast, we have 16. Alaska, we have 11 different case studies, a lot of them dealing with tribal nations. In the Midwest, we have 11. In the Northwest, we have 8. In the Plains, we have 4. So we've really made an effort to have geographical diversity in what we represent. And so I think you'll find as AmeriCorps, Vista AmeriCorps members that there should be something there for you. Just zooming in on the western United States here, Alaska, here's an example from Alaska, one from Phoenix, Central Arizona, Colorado, and one from North Dakota. So even rural places, even remote places, we really have tried to represent the things you're interested in, and we'd really value hearing whether they're helpful to you. So that's how we help people find case studies that are relevant to them. Any questions sort of about finding case studies before I move on? Okay, it's pretty basic. We want to start with something easy, but I want you to notice a couple things. If you actually choose any case study, and I'm going to choose things from different places just to keep a variety of material in this presentation, but we've curated these case studies not only to represent a narrative of stressors and impacts and how people address building resilience to them, but then how do these tie in with tools that the federal government has to offer and vetted resources under this topics section from the National Climate Assessment and other federal reporting programs. How can I find additional resources? And then really importantly, how does this tie in with a process of building resilience? So this is your first introduction to our steps to resilience. We've cataloged the metadata of where different communities are project by project in a 5-step process that we are defining. And we're going to get more into that in a moment, but this is your first introduction to the idea that we have multiple navigation pathways to the same content, which frees you up as a site visitor and someone who might, in one case, want to find resources to present to the City Council. In another case, you might be looking for a tool. This stitches those things together so that you can zoom out to a higher level of information or zoom in to decision-making processes as the need arises. So case studies are really a staple idea, but not the only way in the door. I'm going to shift gears now, unless I don't think there are any questions, and I want to talk about the framing of how you work with teams of people to define and solve problems. And the way we'd like you to begin thinking is in systems by explicitly defining, in addition to those threat asset pairs that we discussed already, what are the different impacts that can influence them, and then what are the things you can do to measure your success and to actually moderate those impacts over time. So I'm a systems thinker, I'm an ecologist, and this is the way I think, and I'm hoping this can be helpful to you. I'm going to take another example here, just shifting geographies a little bit and looking at another case study. This is some recent flooding from the St. Louis region, and obviously it's the confluence of major river systems, the Mississippi and the Missouri river systems. The Merrimack as a tributary also delivers a lot of water. This is just this past December, some major flooding that happened in St. Louis, and really is an important reminder that the very forces that provide economic strength to a region, like the waterways that provide transportation and access to goods and services, can also bring with it climate-related threats. So here in the St. Louis region, they've got this concept of a river ring around the city where they've realized that by setting aside natural lands in the floodplains, they can improve infiltration and slow down the flow of water, especially, along this tributary here, the Merrimack River, the Missouri, along these tributaries and along the major riverways. They can slow down the flow of water, which reduces the dangerous impacts of the flow of water. Where I live on one of the oldest rivers in the world, the French Broad, and these floodplains allow the massive volume of water to spread out and slow down. So by preserving the land along the river, they realized that they could moderate the impact of these floods. So as if I hadn't said this 10 times already, we're really focused on threats and assets as they're joined together. The asset here of interest, let's say, is is infrastructure in the floodplain, populations, businesses. And the threats involve flooding. And so what we want to do is really explicitly map this out in a system context. So we have assets in the floodplain, the infrastructure, flooding that can threaten it. So now we want to know what are the stressors, the things that can exacerbate flooding. Certainly heavy precipitation events, early spring snowmelt, both of which are climate related, but also impervious surfaces in the watershed can speed the delivery of water over land into the riverway, or if those impervious surfaces are in the floodplain, they can not serve the natural function that floodplains do of slowing down water, and that can increase the danger of flooding. And looking to the future then, each of these has influences that can lower resilience. So climate change, if it leads to heavier precipitation or earlier spring melt, you can get more severe floods. Or as population grows and we build roads and we build infrastructure in floodplains and increase impervious surfaces, we can increase the erosive potential and force of the rivers during flood events. So what action can we take? We can conserve land in natural land use along rivers, and then we can measure the impact by how much property damage is done during a flood of, say, comparable impact. And obviously, if you remove property from the tax base in floodplains, you're going to have less property damage. But there's also the influence of debris floating downriver, and if there's less debris, then that's impacted downstream. So this is an example of what we mean by defining a system in terms of the threat asset pairs, the climate and non-climate stressors, the future impacts, the actions you can take, and the indicators you can measure over time. Now usually for all of you working in specific communities, you're going to want to list multiple things that you can measure, multiple co-benefits. You can have win-win situations. Let's say we take roadways out of the floodplain. We're decreasing the impervious surface. We're decreasing the amount of property prone to damage. We have alternative transportation routes so we don't have disrupted economic activity. And we have increased property values for people who are, say, adjacent to the floodplain and now have a multiple use benefit of the recreation of that floodplain. So for each of you working embedded in communities that are really interested in economic growth and social services delivery through times of crisis, but also on a regular basis, you're going to really need to work to find multiple benefits, as well as listing all of the threats and assets that you're interested in, and then begin to build a systems understanding of how these are linked together. So that's the core idea that really underlies the future steps to building resilience, is the capacity to define the system and come up with measurable and discrete actions that you can take, that you can discuss with your colleagues. So here's an example from Pittsburgh. I just sat in on a seminar last week in which one of the city planners presented some work that they had done with RAND Corporation on the co-benefits of doing some ecosystem restoration, developing parks along creeks. By looking at co-benefits, the city realized that they had a lot to benefit and gain from enacting some of these plans. So for you in Pittsburgh, I imagine you've made connections with the city on these ideas, and I'm presenting something that you've already seen before, but these are the kinds of mapping activities and inventory processes that you'll want to do as you move into the resilience building process. Okay, so just recapping and simplifying and generalizing. Define your assets that you're valuing what are the threats to those assets, and what are the climate stressors and non-climate stressors that influence those threats. How will those change in the future? What can I measure to determine whether my asset is threatened? And what action can I take that would have a measurable influence?
And Ned, this is Rachel. I'm going to jump in just for 1 second because the conceptual model that you just presented actually is really, I think, really relevant to a couple of communities that we have out there. And sorry to put you guys on the spot, but I see that we have a few folks on the phone from Minot. And I know that you guys are dealing with a lot of flood preparedness and recovery. And I was wondering if you have any reactions from seeing the conceptual model that Ned presented around flooding issues.
I guess we're still, in a position that this is new to us, and so I think sounding too preliminary. We're following along, but I guess not ready to make a comment yet.
No worries. Yeah, and I was definitely putting you on the spot there, but for everyone who's on the phone, once this sort of sinks in a little bit more, I know that Ned would be, would love to hear the feedback on whether or not this kind of model is useful for folks.
Yeah, the conversation is very understandable, and we're following along. But I guess we haven't related it back to what we're doing as a city yet. For sure.
Thanks.
Well, I can offer an example from the city of Aspen. Last week, I was walking through this with some leaders from around the country, and our team presented this idea, and we worked with the city of Aspen to develop their own conceptual model of an issue that they were interested in. So right after this, we're going to take a little break so you all can have a bio break, and we can come back and do the second half of the seminar. But pay attention to this because Rachel's going to present an optional activity of building your own conceptual model for your community. And so I'd just like you to kind of listen with that in mind as I go through this. So the city of Aspen did a vulnerability assessment of 6 different sectors, and here I'm just focusing on consumptive water use, but we could make this spaghetti diagram even more convoluted by adding the 5 more. And it's actually helpful to go ahead and do your analyses on multiple assets. But to keep this simple, we'll just focus on consumptive water use, by which I mean the use of water for drinking. And here, the critical threat is whether the river discharge would go below a threshold for which it becomes difficult to withdraw water. So, and the threats to the water supply include the non-climate stressor of hydroelectric demand, which is a consumptive water use. When hydroelectric projects sometimes will withdraw water, they will heat it up and it does not become suitable for drinking, but or it's diverted for long enough that it's effectively taken out of use for in-stream uses or consumptive use. So hydroelectric power associated with population is one of the drivers of this critical threshold in river discharge. But also climate clearly influences river discharge. And in Colorado, which experienced a pretty major drought back in 2013 and has been at the epicenter of both droughts and floods, there are a lot of climate stressors on available surface water. Snowpack, heat, which leads to higher evapotranspiration or drought. Rainfall intensity, if you have very intense precipitation events, you can have high runoff 1 week and then very low base flow for prolonged periods, which leads to lots of problems for water managers. And the frequency of inundations is changing with climate. So given all of these climate stressors and the non-climate stressor, just here choosing one of hydroelectric demand, the city realized they needed to have an anticipatory management strategy to be able to balance the need for hydroelectric supply with consumptive uses of water over time, and be able to initiate quickly discussions among relevant people when it was obvious that there were going to be prolonged periods where water was not available. And there's a very measurable metric of demand as well as water level. So mapping all this out was just a way for the city managers and city planners in Aspen to build understanding among the people who are making decisions about the consumption of water. So you may find that building a conceptual model like this is useful in your community. Are there any questions about this approach to just mapping out your own system? Okay, hearing none, I'd like to suggest that we take a 10-minute break, let's say a 9-minute break, and get together at 3:10 Eastern Time. Come back on the phone, and we'll continue with the next part of the webinar. And in the meantime, if anyone wants to stay on the phone and talk, I'm happy to informally chat.
Hey, Ned.
Yeah.
Can you go back to the conceptual slide that you had? The one before the water consumption? Yeah, the conceptual model.
Yeah, who's this speaking?
This is Pam from Norfolk.
Hi, Pam.
I was just looking at that to see if it applied to what we're going to be doing.
Okay, yeah. And I can send this slide deck around so people can look at it. Yeah, so the key here is it really starts with the assets, and that's where we started in the webinar.
Right.
And then you think about the threats to those assets. Do they have climate and non-climate stressors, and are those likely to change over time?
Right.
And then what can you do about it, and what would you measure to see whether you were being successful in taking any action?
Right.
I don't have any music to play during our interlude here, but I'm assuming people need a little time to get up and stretch their legs.
Hey Ned, this is Alex. Just speaking informally. What's your son doing at CMU?
Oh, he's studying drama.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So they just finished up, and he's heading home tomorrow. So then he'll spend the summer up in Pittsburgh.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, there's a school to go for drama.
Yeah.
CMU is a great one for it.
True. Yeah. It's
very cool.
Yeah, it's been a strong program for him. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Best of luck to him. What year is he in?
He's rising junior.
Cool. Awesome.
This year they begin their stage productions.
All right, best of luck to him.
Thank you. Have you connected with the city and their resilience building efforts?
Myself?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're really leading the efforts there for that. We're going through phase 2 of the 100 Resilient Cities process.
Okay.
So we are really kind of starting to dig into our strategy, and we're starting to kind of come up with the concept of workshops and trying to reach as many community members as possible and train them on becoming resilient leaders in their communities.
Fantastic. So are you working with Grant Irvin?
Yes, yeah, he is our supervisor.
Excellent.
And then Rebecca Kiernan is our senior resilience coordinator, and Elmi and I is kind of wrangler.
Well, it might be interesting to follow up and just kind of look through some of what's been done there, since Pittsburgh is well on the way.
Yes, definitely.
And maybe report that back to the group and show, because I know they've been kind of publicizing their work and helping other cities understand the processes that they went through.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be happy to follow up with you offline and talk about that.
Yeah, we could do that. Sure thing. Do you have my email?
I'm not sure I do, and I am going to be out of pocket for all of May, but in June I could follow up with you.
Okay. Why don't I send you just real quick my email?
Okay.
Then off through the chat.
That sounds fine.
All right. Yeah. So when you're back and ready to connect, just drop me a line,
okay.
And hopefully by then we'll be more farther along with our resilience initiative.
Great. Okay, well, I think I'm going to pick things up, and people can join back in, filter in as need be. I want to jump into the steps to resilience. So at the beginning of the, even before the webinar, we sent out that survey with the idea of understanding who you are and where you are in the process of building resilience. For those of you who are in the scoping and early phases, having some steps to follow can be a really useful guiding heuristic. And so we've put the 5 steps to resilience in place with the idea in mind that there are communities all over the country who really can use that kind of support. If you're in Pittsburgh or another community that is well away, you're probably already tuning into tools, data, resources that help you to take specific actions. So for all of you, the steps to resilience can also serve a valuable added benefit of keeping your work in context and helping you relate to other communities. So stay tuned to this, and then in the last section, we'll kind of get into where to go from here. So we've put together this, this rubric, basically separating out the key idea of did you know, and I'd like to ask whoever just joined in to please mute your phone. So you want to keep track of climate stressors and identify the climate-related threats to your valued assets. And that's really an information gathering process. So did you know that less snowpack means you know, more likelihood of drought, or earlier spring runoff means more likelihood of flooding, and you know, understanding the influence of those specific climate drivers on assets that you do care about. The assets really bring you to that value that you as a person or as a community or a business have for people, for specific infrastructure, for key assets like roads. But then once you've cataloged those threats and assets, you want to move into what can we do? And that's really a process of discernment, analysis, discussion, and decision making. So we have 3 steps that specifically tackle the things that you can do. So we've already discussed all of this in a general systems framework, and now we're going to dive into how you would procedurally kind of tackle all of these issues in a way that helps you keep your logic clear. So if nothing else, even if you don't do this in a linear way yourself, being able to talk about where you are in the evaluation process, even as you iterate over time to refine your process, these 5 steps can really be a helpful guidepost. Revisiting our general conceptual diagram, the did you know part about climate and assets really addresses the core of the diagram. And then why should we care is the what can we do about it are those 2 symbols off to the side, the indicators and the actions we can take. So did you know that there's a climate stressors? Why should I care? Because my asset is threatened. And what am I doing about it, and how do I measure it? Then becomes the focus of my later stages. So this is how this all fits into the conceptual model, but now we're going to dive into processes that you can go through with your community. The very first thing is building a team, and a team of people really should consist of those people who have either responsibility for an asset or control resources relevant to that asset or the climate or non-climate stressors on that asset. So yes, everyone has an interest in almost any topic, but what we mean in terms of building a team of stakeholders is the group of people who are actually going to influence the decision. And that's important so that you can keep your discussions focused on those decision points that are relevant. As a team, then, you define your goals, objectives. You define your system, just as Kate, I think, described the system in Louisiana as focusing on the community of people living on the coast and their cultural identity and their capacity to remain in relationship with one another even if they move. Defining that goal and objective is different from defining the goal and objective of your state budget or your transportation corridor. So you have to do that process as a team and focus on the asset you're really concerned about, whether it's people or things, and what are the threats to those assets. So in step one, we really focus on answering one question, which has a mirror image. Is there a climate opportunity or a climate threat that influences an asset that we care about? And if the answer is yes, you clearly move on in the process. So one way that we support you answering that question through the Climate Resilience Toolkit is getting vetted information about about your area of concern. So here are the regions that the Global Change Research Program defines and that are represented as regions within the National Climate Assessment. This is the interagency report that comes out periodically describing the impacts of climate on our nation. And by region, it sort of separates out the climatically relevant information. So focusing on the Northeast, for example, heat waves, extreme precipitation, coastal flooding are all important issues if you live in the northeastern United States. So we would capture that information in these different topic areas of the Climate Resilience Toolkit. So we're moving away from, now I'm taking you away from the case studies into this domain of how do I get vetted information, graphics, written material that I can bring into a city council meeting, into a community meeting, into a meeting with business people that says this is what the government has documented are the impacts of climate change on our nation already. And so we've separated them into coastal flood, these different topical areas, and I would invite you to explore this on your own. The subtopics within each topic then provide access into case studies and tools as one different navigation pathway. So one way to think of this is coming into the toolkit that you have a topical interest. I know I'm interested in energy supply and having a resilient energy supply. So I go into that topic area and jump off into relevant information, or coastal flood risk. I jump in here, get vetted information, and go to a subtopic, say storm surge. And I could find all the case studies in this taking action section. You can see there's 2 pages worth of case studies, or 5 pages of tools, all related to storm surge. And this is just another way of cataloging through metadata all of these resources for you. So at this point, I think Rachel is going to take you through an exercise of your own to use the topics section.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Ned. Okay, so again, I'm going to have you guys navigate back to toolkit.climate.gov if you're not still already there, and go to the site's topics section. And then the next thing you're going to do is just select whatever topic you're most interested in or is most relevant to the work you're doing in your community. And once you've done that, you're going to want to select from there a subtopic. And then finally, identify, after you've clicked on your subtopic, one case study that interests you and one tool that might be helpful to you. And as you can see, I've basically just read those instructions from the slide. So if you weren't paying attention, just look at the slide and you'll know exactly what to do. We're going to take a minute to do this, and then I'm going to ask someone to just report out on what they found. So we'll take 1 minute now for folks to identify their topic, subtopic, case study, and tool. All right. So hopefully you've all had a chance to do the exercise. Is there anyone out there on the line who wants to let us know what they found? So anyone feel free to jump in.
Hello, this is Candace from El Paso.
Hey, Candace.
So I chose food resilience as my topic.
Uh-huh.
And then my subtopic is building food resilience. And then from there, under the learn more section, I chose economic research service international food security. And I think that's as far as I got.
Awesome. No, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing. And do you want to just say a little bit about why you chose food resilience?
Sure. So I'm the Sustainable Neighborhood Specialist, the VISTA member for El Paso, and my impact volunteer initiative is focused on sustainable food systems. So basically, kind of researching and coming up with the best ways for El Paso to have a sustainable food system.
Great, thanks.
So that's an interesting one you chose. In fact, I should tip my hat to Rachel because she flagged that this is exactly where a bunch of you were going to want to go. And when we went to this particular section prior to the webinar, we both realized we had one that, we have some tools here that we can link you to, atlases of food access, food environment atlas, and the Arctic Adaptation Exchange, but we don't have case studies. So how does that situation emerge? It emerges because our theme team within the government hasn't identified those case studies. So I would say we're interested in feedback about what you think would be good examples of highlighting how tools and data are being used in building food resilience. So good one to flag.
Is there anyone else out there who found a cool topic that they want to share?
Well, we can move on. Hey, sorry, I had to get over to the phone. This is Nancy in Minot.
Awesome. Hey, Nancy.
Hi. I chose, I had to move from my computer. I chose, where is it? Down here. Water resources? No. Oh, energy supply and usage.
Uh-huh.
And I chose energy consumption. Because it's kind of interesting for Minot, our slogan here is protect, power, and provide. We have a nuclear Air Force base, so that way Minot helps protect the world. We also, in North Dakota, produce a lot of grains, so we provide for the world. And then we also power the world because we have the back-end oil shale nearby, and so we produce a lot of crude oil, as well as we have a lot of wind farms. And it's just kind of interesting. I'm from the East Coast, so I'm from Georgia, and it's just kind of interesting knowing that the whole state of North Dakota has only 700,000 people in it, but we provide for billions of people. And just seeing that, so we have a lower consumption of energy, but we produce a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interesting. Did you find anything that caught your eye on the energy consumption topic page or a subtopic that you want to dive more into later?
I'll probably skim over it some more, but I didn't go too terribly far into it. It's kind of interesting just knowing how much we do produce, but also knowing how little we consume of what we produce. It was just kind of interesting for me. And I studied economics, so it's extra interesting for me.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing, Nancy.
Yep.
That's really interesting, Nancy. I'm going to move on, and I think you all get the idea of how to use the topic section at this point. We do hope that you will find that section useful, that the vetted information as text and graphics can be helpful to you in making presentations of your own, and we would welcome feedback if you do or don't find tools or resources that help you. But so then the idea is by using information like that, you can help people understand the climate-related threats. And now we're going to kind of look at assets and exposure to those threats. So in order to really catalog this, you need to be able to look and discern how climate actually influences that asset of concern. And that's where the system diagram becomes, it's important to be able to refine your understanding of the climate stressors. So we're looking for sensitivities in the system and critical thresholds. So to the extent that the historical data can help you characterize risk, that's one thing you need to do. And then you may want to look at future risks. So keep that in mind, because I'm going to take you into some tools a little later that allow you to characterize historical and future risks. The key we're driving toward in step 2, though, is what is the risk of a loss, and is that tolerable? So a loss of a picnic park, a picnic bench, is not a big loss. A loss of a roadway would be very disruptive. And so being able to describe those in real terms to your team is the goal here. So doing those kinds of assessments require using tools. So we have, literally over 200 tools in the toolkit, and you need an ability to go through and find the ones that are most relevant to you. I'm going to focus you in on a tool that I find to be very helpful. It's called Climate at a Glance. And I want you to notice here that wherever we catalog a tool, each of the 220 tools, it has an external URL where you will launch the tool. These are all the topics it's related to. There'll be a link to a case study where that tool is either used or would be useful. Oops, I've just clicked crazy. And documentation on how to use the tool. So you have some support before jumping out into and using a tool, but today I'd like to encourage you to go ahead and try finding and using Climate at a Glance right now. So Rachel?
She may be on mute.
Okay.
Oh, sorry about that. Yep, I was on mute. Okay, so like we've done the last few times, you'll see sort of the instructions for this exercise up on the slide. But basically the goal here is to go through finding a tool that helps you visualize how climate conditions are changing in your community. So navigate to the Tools section, and then using the filter, select these two following categories. So you want to select View Past/Current Conditions and Analyze/Download Data. Okay, so everyone just take a minute to do that now. Then we'll go through 2 and 3.
So there's a lot of complexity to this tool. The key takeaway that I'm hoping you'll get by doing this is that you have a navigation pathway through the Climate Resilience Toolkit into federal tools from many different agencies. And this is one that we at NOAA use quite a lot to help people understand climate variability.
Okay, we're so NOAA.
Hi, you've just joined and you're not
sorry.
on mute. That's okay.
Typical me.
Quite all right.
It happens to me quite often.
So once you find Climate at a Glance, Rachel, I'm going to just jump in here and say this is a fairly complex tool to use, and I can provide some support offline for giving you some instructions on clicking through and using it. But I'd like to pick up on what Nancy just pointed out about energy, and I believe someone else mentioned something very similar, being interested in energy consumption. I was on the phone last week in a similar context with someone from Siemens Corporation in Florida. He's really interested in cooling degree days. So what that is a cooling degree day it's a little bit of a complicated definition, but if the temperature goes above 65 degrees, let's say it becomes 60, it's the average temperature for one day is 66 degrees, that's one cooling degree day. If the temperature is 90 degrees on average for an entire day, then that's 25 cooling degree days. So being able to track cooling degree days throughout the year is a way of tracking potentially consumption of electricity for air conditioning using climate data straight out of the box. So this is an exercise we did with this person from Siemens to show him the demand, not even accounting for population, just strictly based on temperature in southeastern Florida. So here excuse me. I have a mouse that does crazy things sometimes. So here we're looking at the Climate at a Glance interface, two screens of it pasted together. At the top of the screen, you'll see a list of parameters, and I've chosen cooling degree days. And by choosing year to date and December, I'm essentially looking at annual data, so the number of cooling degree days accumulated through an entire year. And we're looking at the entire time series from 1895 through 2016 in the lower east coast of Florida. And so what you can see in the graph that's in the lower right-hand corner is that it's been getting warmer on an annual basis in a quite measurable way. So the gray line through the graph that you see, that's roughly at 3625 degree Fahrenheit over a year. That's the average cooling degree days for the 20th century. And you could see that there were definitely periods of decades that were below that 20th century average, and that over the past several decades, it's been very steadily marching upward. And this is, again, this is not electrical demand. This is just the climate signal in southeastern Florida. So being able to show these kind of data to your electric utility commission is helpful. If you're in a northern climate, I would suggest you look at heating degree days. It's the number of degrees below 65 degrees that the temperature drops. And so while it's an inverse measurement, you'll see a graph that's very similar in shape for a northern climate. And generally in the United States, the northern climates have been experiencing fewer. Now, I said it's the same shape, and that's wrong. I was going too quickly. It's the opposite shape. The number of heating degree days is actually decreasing. And so that's really relevant if you're an energy supplier and you're interested in helping your communities be prepared for the power load needed to drive heating and cooling. Any questions about this somewhat complicated but very useful climate-derived tool and metric? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move on. And we're still moving through the steps to resilience. And now we're moving into what can we do about the stresses that we've measured and the impacts on the assets that we care about. So in practical experience, this is a phase in which it's often really helpful to have the assistance of a climate expert, someone who is very familiar with climate data understands how the data are processed, understands the relationship between these data, and things like, and can articulate them in language that someone who's familiar with business processes and best practices will understand, or someone who understands how to analyze hazards. So when you're doing evaluations in a complex system involving climate and non-climate stressors, assets, and threats, it's important to have the expertise you need on hand. We're really trying to get to a decision of what are the actions that we can take that would decrease our risk. And doing that really does involve sometimes some expertise that's not in the room. And that's why we've focused on 3 different pathways for building expertise among your team. One is through a map interface. And what we've done is we've begun to compile what we see as some of the best resources in the federal government for finding experts. I said federal government, but also, state climatologists, which are not federal employees. They're often university employees. The different funded programs at NOAA, for instance, RESAs, Regional Climate Centers. Here we've focused on the Regional Climate Services Director, and we've clicked on the Northeast region to identify that Ellen McRae is in the Northeast region. She provides, she's a really great networker who knows lots of people who are involved in climate adaptation, climate analysis. So being able to get to an actual person and understand the role that they can play in advising or connecting you with an advisor is a really critical science translation piece that I'm confident you'll find you need at some point. So please check out the Find Experts map. But we also directly can support you in learning more about climate. We've got a growing list of training courses on our site. And we have filters that allow you to find courses suited to your own interests. And I'd invite you to check out those. We've just added this week the vetted reports that are available at a national level and at a regional and sometimes state level that give you peer-reviewed science about impacts and about climate. This is a deeper dive for you, and one of the things that I find really valuable about these reports is they provide a fantastic annotated bibliography, essentially, allowing you to understand the scientific basis for the conclusions that you're presenting to people. So if you are finding yourself making presentations to decision makers, you need to know that your data, that there are teeth there, that you really have a firm leg to stand on in making the statements you're making. So check out our report section. It's brand new. We're really excited about it. It includes things like the National Climate Assessment, but also regional reports. So we're going to, I'm going to pass it back to Rachel now, and she's just going to take you to through a quick exercise.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ned. And actually, if you wouldn't mind going back to that previous slide for just a second, VISTA members, you'll see that the report that's showing up in this screenshot right here is the impacts of climate change on human health. And that's actually the report that you were invited to a webinar to sort of hear more about that report last week. I don't know if anyone had a chance to join in, but the reason why I want to highlight that is, in addition to using the Climate Resilience Toolkit to find reports and to find experts, one of the roles that we're trying to play on the Resilience AmeriCorps, sort of program team, and my role as the training coordinator, is to make sure that you're making all of the connections possible between resources you find and the people who produce those resources. So that if you have questions or you want to dive deeper, that you'll know exactly who to reach out to. And so I just think it's a nice connection between sort of the Find Experts feature on the Climate Resilience Toolkit and the Reports feature on the Climate Resilience Toolkit. And then sort of the final step, if you haven't found what you need on either of those things, is you can reach out directly to us if you've found a resource and you want to dig deeper, and we'll make sure that you're connected with the right folks for that. But moving back again to the exercise, so again, just giving you a little more hands-on experience with using the site. So we'll go to the expertise section and use the Find Experts map to find a land management consultant. So if you want to do that right now, you can go ahead. You'll see that there are some grayed out instructions on this slide, and that's really for if you want to sort of dive deeper on your own in learning how to use this feature. But for now, we'll focus on step number 1 on the slide and step number 4. So go ahead and find an expert, a land management consultant on that map. And once you've done that, is there anyone who wants to share which Department of Interior Climate Science Center is closest to your area?
This is Minot, North Dakota. Donna, we have at North Dakota State University. I would not know how to pronounce his name, but that's our state climatologist. So it's about 300 miles from us.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
Practically a next-door neighbor.
Right. I'm going there tomorrow. I suppose I could pop in and visit with him.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Yes,
and so what we were aiming for here is also, if you see that Department of the Interior has its own category in the mapping section, they have climate science centers and landscape conservation cooperatives. So I was just wanting to draw your attention to the climate science centers, and there are fewer of them. They're more widely dispersed, but they do coalesce a lot of researchers regionally. So the North Central Climate Science Center might be the closest one to you, and they do work throughout the entire Missouri River drainage. So they may be relevant to you, for example. So that's kind of a glimpse into how we're hoping you'll be able to find expertise, and it's good you know your state climatologist. It's a great person to know. Moving into step 4, though, now just continuing to go through the process, the resilience building process as we've been building it. I've been using a term without defining it, which is risk. And here we're talking about, in order to prioritize actions, we need to do qualitative and quantitative assessments of which actions are going to result in good cost-benefit trade-offs. So the sequence of steps here of looking at a sequence of steps to take, analyzing risks associated with them. Some of those risks might be, does it cost us more to not take action or to take action? So what trade-offs do we need to make in order to define how we want to address the problem as we defined it so far? And then what's the best value we can get? What action can we take that really gives us a good value? So my colleagues spent some time working through a specific example of this in Marquette, Michigan, where they had done climate assessments and they had actually cataloged their resources, their threats, their stressors, how to measure these stressors, what changes are likely to happen, and ultimately they came up with assessments of vulnerability. And here this is an important process for cataloging and understanding relative vulnerability so that in a very complex decision-making framework, you have some basis for pushing one project up above another one. But we can take this even further by arraying it on a 2D matrix and qualitatively assessing the likelihood of a threat and the magnitude of the consequence. And when you multiply those two together, that is risk. Risk is the combination of both the threats from climate and non-climate stressors and the magnitude of the consequence. So losing your water supply is almost incalculable in terms of the magnitude of the threat. But, you know, just to be trivial, I gave the example of a park bench. That's a low consequence. It might even have a high possibility of a threat, but it doesn't matter very much because it's easy to replace. So we're interested in this process, this matrix process, in identifying the most important next steps to take. And so that's what they did in Marquette, Michigan, in the example that I alluded to earlier. So once you've kind of done this evaluation, you might be about ready to take action, and you'd be looking for funding opportunities to do that. So we do have a funding opportunities section of the website where you can search for state but primarily federal grants that can support the kind of activities that you want to take. And this is really to support your ability to implement a plan, monitor it, and then share lessons learned. So it's really important to circle back to that sharing of lessons learned, what you were able to measure, whether there was a measurable impact. Because all of us on the phone right now are part of a growing field, and it's going to grow more robust as we share both things that worked and didn't work. We often focus on things that work, but failures are literally successes if we learn from them. So to be able to share those in a forum like this is really important. So we're really hoping you'll come back to us and provide us your lessons learned from your own examples. I wanted to show you from a story that we produced an example of how in coastal Louisiana, how important it was to come up with ways not only to understand what to measure, but the measurement itself of the height of the levees turned out to be a really difficult problem. And they had to invent an entirely new way of using GPS technology in order to even detect where to place their, where to pile up dirt, essentially, in levees. So I bring this up because you're going to be part of a process of creativity and invention. Being able to share those lessons back with all of us is really important. So I want to close with just some waving my hands at some things that are coming soon, but probably the most important and useful feature in the entire toolkit is this really, really valuable search function. It's implemented in such a way that it's been, our search has been indexed across all federal resources, and you can optionally choose to put toolkit content first. And it's just a very easy, quick way to get access to our resources. And it's available in the upper right corner of your screen pretty much all the time in the toolkit. So I just wanted to orient you to that. There was a question in the pre-webinar survey about climate projections. So a lot of people want to know about what are some possible futures that my community should face. And at the end of June, we're going to be launching this interface that allows you to look at a county level at downscale climate projections. And here we're looking in northern Maryland. And what this shows you in a glance are the observed climate history with these bars where the red bars that are above a virtual line here show the positive daily maximum temperature anomalies, which means the years when the temperature was warmer than the long-term average between 1961 and 1990. And the blue bars are the below average years. This gray area shows that models in the past, you take all the models and all the realizations of all the models, they create an envelope. And that envelope captures what really did happen. And that's how we have confidence that these models are working in a way that's consistent with the way weather actually has evolved in the past. The same models, if you project them into the future using two scenarios, one is a high emissions scenario shown in this peach red color. They show a steady upward trajectory of daily maximum temperature. And this is important if your community is dealing with construction projects and you have people who are vulnerable to heat because they're working on asphalt and they need to be prepared for the health consequences of being exposed to high temperatures over a long period of time. These kinds of data are useful. And we have 8 different decision-ready parameters that we will provide through this interface. We're very excited about it. It's a big effort. It represents work by U.S. Geological Survey, NASA, NOAA, and a number of other agencies. It's going to be a really neat tool, and we'll make sure you're aware of it when it hits the streets pretty soon. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to you, Rachel, and I want to thank all of you for your time and just make sure we take some time to answer some questions, but I just want to review that we did go over how to use the Climate Resilience Toolkit, the 5-step process. I used the heuristic of how to think in systems and to build your own conceptual model of your system. Before we go on to next steps, I just want to make sure I address any questions you have before you go on to smooth sailing in the area of building climate resilience. And if there are none, I'll just turn it over to you, Rachel.
Okay, thanks, Doug. We'll go back to Q&A at the very end just to make sure, folks might need some time to process what their questions are, which is great. But let me just quickly go over next steps. Okay, so you just had this whirlwind introduction to the Climate Resilience Toolkit. A lot of information thrown at you. Hopefully it was slightly interactive. But what we really would love you to do is actually to apply what you learned in this webinar through a short take-home exercise. So there's going to be 3 options for this, and I'll describe each of them in just a second. And then we're going to be having a follow-up webinar, probably shorter than this one, and really based actually much more on your sharing and your ideas and questions. And that'll be a chance for everyone to talk about their experience applying the concepts and skills that they learned today, and then giving some feedback on what it was like to use the Climate Resilience Toolkit to actually help with your project-based work. And then, of course, answer any questions or problems that you're having in using the site. So that webinar is going to be planned for the week of June 6th or the week of June 13th, and I'll be sending a follow-up email where you can indicate your date preference. In that follow-up email will also be an explanation of the different options for follow-up work. So option 1, and we'll describe this in the email, will be to build your own conceptual model. So if the idea of conceptual models really resonated with you and you'd like to create one for your own community, that's something that you can do between now and the next webinar. Another option for what you might do between now and the next webinar is basically do step 1 of this 5-step process that Ned went through, which is identifying your community's problems, assessing risks, assessing vulnerabilities. And then option 3 is going to be simply identifying a tool or a case study that's super relevant to what you're working on in your community, and taking some time to reflect on, what it was like to use that tool or case study in your work. Regardless of which of these options you choose, we want you to take time to reflect on what you learned today and the things that were useful, the things that weren't useful, so that you can share feedback during our next interaction, which will be in one of the first weeks of June. And so I think we'll skip the sort of like in-depth explanation of what the options are for the follow-up work, and I'll just include that in the email. But I want to move to a really exciting announcement, which is that hopefully by now you're all fairly familiar with the VISTA virtual campus, and we've actually launched a series of resilience pages on the VISTA campus. So those are targeted, of course, first and foremost to you all Resilience AmeriCorps VISTA members and supervisors and members of our program community, but we also want to get other VISTAs engaged in resilience work. Well, rather, we know that other VISTAs are engaged in resilience-related work, and we want to make sure that they can have access to some resources as well. So I've put up a couple of links here for you to check out, but the one I really want to focus in on is the Resilience Discussion Forum. A couple of you specifically asked for this feature. I know some of you have been active on the existing VISTA forums, but this is a new forum dedicated specifically to resilience. There's a welcome post up there now for me just kind of talking about logistics, and then Max Finberg, the director of AmeriCorps VISTA, has posted as well, asking folks to reply and reflect on their experience so far in their service. So I would highly, highly encourage you to actually just navigate there right now. Make sure you're logged into the VISTA campus, and if you're logged in, you should see, once you navigate to the forum, an option to subscribe to that resilience discussion forum, and you'll want to make sure you subscribe so that you get updates on when new things are posted. In addition to this being a resource for you all to just talk and share and discuss amongst yourselves, we also have a great lineup of guest posters who are going to be coming from federal agencies. We have some folks from the American Society of Adaptation Professionals who are going to be posting climate adaptation updates. So I think it'll be a really great resource for you to keep checking back to. And again, please do hit that subscribe button so you'll get the updates. Any questions about those new resilience pages? Oh, the one thing I want to point out about that, in addition to one of the great pages that we've launched is actually sort of a synthesis of U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit resources that are specifically relevant for VISTAs, both Resilience AmeriCorps VISTAs and VISTAs generally. So if you're interacting with other VISTAs and you want to encourage them to check out the Climate Resilience Toolkit, this is a good entry point for that. And again, go to the forum, subscribe to the forum, and post on the forum. Any questions? Okay, did everybody subscribe to the forum already? I know, that was a yes. That was a yes from everyone.
Well, I want to take a moment just to thank everyone for their time, and you, Rachel, for organizing this, and invite you all to feel free to write to us at the Toolkit if you have any questions, whether they be technical, whether it be conceptual. We're really interested in your feedback. We're very interested in you using the Toolkit and giving us a sense of what you found valuable. So I put the URL and the email address for contacting us on screen. And I'm going to be ending the WebEx now because I have to go to another meeting.
Thank you so much, Ned.
You're very welcome.
All All right, thanks everybody. We're going to end. I'll stay on the line for a minute or two. If you have questions, feel free to stay on and let me know, or of course you can always send me an email.